I'm delighted to introduce Amelia McArthur to you. Amelia runs a practice in North Yorkshire, a veterinary practice specialising on the rehabilitation of horses, but other species as well. And she's been given the task to uplift the mood after the news from the field and from the science. So over to you, Amelia.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I just want to say thank you, especially to Katie, for inviting me to speak today. I qualified from the University of Liverpool in 2016. I've had quite a squiggly career since then, and a year ago set up an equine rehabilitation yard at Peter Beaumont's old training yard. So we have access to an ECB water treadmill, we have a 1 mile quite old-fashioned deep sand gallop, we have access to miles and miles of hacking, we have about 8 acres of land and 14 boxes that we rent there. And today I'm hoping to give you a practical overview of how we want to try and rehabilitate these horses, and looking at other things that you might need to consider during the journey, as I will keep referring to it, because none of these are straightforward, and you'll all know that most horses have a setback somewhere along that journey, but the aim is to get them back to their full athletic ability. So when we talk about a holistic approach, most people would think that's quite a wishy-washy term, and it does make me quite sad that the crystal holders and all sorts have adopted the word holistic, but their definition of the word holistic is characterised by a belief that parts of something are interconnected and can be explained only by reference of the whole. So therefore, really, our job as vets is to look at a horse holistically. We look at the whole horse, we don't just look at the one injury. And this is something that I do every day in the yard. When I get presented a new horse, I start by looking at talking to the owner about the history. It might be a very limited, short-known history. It might be years of history known about it. But we need to take into consideration that there may be other injuries or other things that this horse is coping with, as well as the most recent injury it's presented for. Part of that history taking is also looking at the horse's temperament. Now we know with our thoroughbreds, particularly if they're fit, fresh, and were in full work until last week when they bust their tendon, they are probably going to be a lot more difficult to deal with than our coloured cob, although some may argue the other way around if you've ever come across a Welsh D in a bad mood. And then part of when we're looking at a horse, we look at its conformation, or I look very closely at its conformation, because you might have giveaways as to why this injury has occurred. Are they long in the cannons? Are they long in the pasterns? Foot conformation, how has this horse been shod or looked after? Has the farrier been regular? Looking, are they built narrow? Are they built long? Do they have a long back? Do they have a weak back? How's their neck set on? All of these things will change the locomotion of the horse and how they move, and we need to take that into consideration when we're coming up with a plan, and also take into consideration what our end goal is. Is this a 5 furlong sprinter, or is this a 3-day event horse? They have completely different requirements of what their body will need to do at the end or at the end stage. So my first part of the use of the controlled exercise. Now, when I was asked to do this talk, I did a bit of a dive into some of the research, and most of the research just refers to controlled exercise programs, which is a very vague term and definition. The odd research paper did define what they'd done, but they were particularly vague. And I always feel sorry for people when they get presented with, here's my 6-week sheet, and it basically is just increasing amounts of hand walking. We all hate hand walking a fresh horse. I put my hands up and say that it's not my favourite job to do on the yard. Any advice for people that when you're presented with a hand walking? Safety, wear a hat. How many people think, oh, I've got this fresh horse to deal with, and don't put a hat on their head, and then wonder why, they've got kicked in the head, they've been knocked, they've been whatever. It's not very, very obvious thing to do when you talk about it. As you can see, this horse is wearing a chiffney. Everything that we walk out pretty much wears a chiffney and a head collar together, or an in-hand bridle. Again, safety and security of looking, keeping control of them. And also consider the use of sedatives. I was just talking about it with Katie. Settling, yes, it can be frustrating if somebody's giving you a program and says, can you walk it out 3 times a day? And you think, well, I've got to give it 3 mils of settling to walk it out 3 times a day. We can adapt that. If you're saying, okay, I need a bit of settling to walk it out, well, okay, 3 times a day doesn't have to be 3 times a day. Why don't we do 15 minutes in one go? And then at the other end of the day, you do a little bit of some physio exercises. So simply lifting the opposite leg and making them weight bear through the injured leg momentarily is a form of loading that would be similar to your walking. Most good physios can give you weight shift exercises as well. So very simply asking the horse to move its weight backwards and forwards, side to side. These are very simple 10-minute exercises you can do with them in the stable that can help start this progressive loading in a fashion that's safe and controlled. Next slide is an example. I do really enjoy this meme because, as we know, the number of horses that don't actually walk properly when they're fresh and excited, they're not going to get a lot out of jogging around. We actually want them to walk as they should do properly. A very simple rehab program that I tend to then adapt with everything would be to start at 10 minutes and aim to increase it by 10 minutes a week until you reach an hour. Now, that doesn't have to be pure in-hand walking. You can introduce long reining. You could do a little bit of arena work, which it depends whether you want the horse to turn. If it's a racehorse, I would be unlikely to do that with them. But when we're talking about our dressage horses or event horses, part of their required finished work is actually a lot on the turn and in a smaller area. And then whenever you're considering increasing the work, that's when we want a recheck. We want an ultrasound of that to monitor how it's going. But as already discussed, I'm glad everybody's mentioned, everybody has a pair of these and everybody has a pair of these. Use them every day. You've got the opportunity to feel that. I know it become obsessive, and obviously with clients, we kind of actually have to calm them down as to how much they're feeling that leg, because I, for one, am not the one that enjoys the phone call every single day to have an update of whether it was slightly warm today or slightly cold today, or maybe slightly up today or maybe slightly not. And just remembering that each case is an individual. So if you think this is a severe injury, we can stretch it out. And actually what I've personally found is a lot of them, I've ended up shortening it a little bit. We've ended up being like, this is progressing well. But this is not just referring to tendon cases. Another thing to briefly mention, I will not profess that I am a physio in any way whatsoever, but I cannot impress onto people how important their knowledge is and what they add to our cases. So, one thing that I noticed hasn't been mentioned, but it's a very simple thing that maybe not everybody's aware, but a tendon is actually a muscle attaching to a bone. Our physiotherapy works on muscles. So we have got the relationship with the muscles to think about, and the way that the horse is holding itself. If we think of our horse like big body of muscle with elastic bands through the bottom, what's our main supporting structure at the top is that big body of muscle. I like to have a physio come and assess the horses probably when they're about 3 or 4 weeks into their rehab program, and then again when they're sort of 3 or 4 weeks into the next set, so once they've started trotting and adjusting to that. So, as I briefly mentioned, we have an equine water treadmill, which I know lots of trainers use dry treadmills. Both are fantastic in their own way and have a lot to offer. any treadmill work involving a tendon injury should be postponed for at least 4 weeks, and I actually tend to leave it longer. That's because the grip between the platform of the tendon and the horse's foot is increased, and you get less slip. This means there's more strain on the tendon at a lower speed. All right, so it's not something that is recommended in the initial phases of healing because you're actually going to be inadvertently putting more strain on it. However, when we're talking about controlled, safe environments to walk a horse in, a treadmill is much easier than an open, big yard. And sometimes we have to balance, what the horse is doing in front of us and how it's coping. With what we've got available to us that's safe for the horse, because the last thing we need is another injury to be dealing with. And just to quickly to mention as well that we need to think about different surfaces that we're walking these horses on. So initially I tend to stick to, we've got a really lovely, nice straight lane. It's flat, it's hard, it's level. But when we progress through, we use the gallop quite a lot for long reining round at walk. It's deep, it's different, it's a different surface for them to adapt to. And actually, we will quite often do long reining hacks around the local land. We've got flatter areas to go down, we've got quite steep hills to go up and down. And it's part of thinking about what we're preparing that horse for. Ultimately, one of the things we'd like to do, or most of the pleasure horse owners, or even sports horse owners would like to do, is have these horses out in a field. But if we've only been walking it on a hard level surface, how have we prepared that for then going to live in a field and not repeat the injury? So this is one of the cases that came to us for a slimming, clearly not a thoroughbred. This is a Highland pony. Probably one of the fattest horses I've ever seen when he first came to us in the right-hand picture. You could touch him and his entire body moved. This horse had quite a severe MRI DDFT lesion in one of his front feet, and the owner had done the initial box rest and he'd come sound, and then decided that the best thing to do was to chuck it in a field for a year. And as I explained to her, the extra 100 kilos of weight he was carrying was probably not ideal for his tendon and his foot. And I think it's really important that we also consider actually the weight of the rider and the balance of the rider in horses as well. I don't think I've ever been brave enough yet to tell a rider that they're too heavy for their horse, and I don't know if anybody in this room has. Well done. There was one hand that went up. I probably do need to get a lot braver at that, particularly when we're thinking about our racehorses leaving training. It is quite upsetting, the number that are going to inappropriate homes with riders that weigh, between 12 and 14 stone, and your little flat horse has probably carried no more than 8 or 9 stone in training. Let me just check there's nothing on there. Yeah, and actually, we were talking, there was brief mention of social license earlier in the day. Most people think the horse on the right is normal. That's a normal weight for a horse. It's our job to go out there and educate them that is completely abnormal. The thing that might make you feel slightly hopeful is actually he's been going out showing this year on the left, and he's won every time out this time, and the judges have always commented on his condition, i.e. it's not obese compared to the others he's competing against. But having said that, I've taken mine in a couple of the little ROR thoroughbred classes. He's an event horse, really, and I've been told he doesn't have enough condition on him, which I'm slightly perturbed by, because he's probably got more condition on than he ever had when he was running. Again, I won't profess to be a farrier, but farriery and the base that the horse stands on is really important to consider. Please excuse how rubbish this picture is. It's the only one I could find of a shoe that was in my backlog of pictures. But farriery is, a good farrier is worth their weight in gold. You must look after them. My personal opinion of a sign of a really good farrier is the one that holds their hands up and says, in a really complicated case, says, actually, I need to phone a friend. I'm going to gather a few opinions on this about what I should be doing. But also couple that with, I would never tell my farrier what to do. I would slowly suggest to him ideas that I may have, and we will have a discussion about it. I don't know about down the Newmarket, but certainly in Yorkshire, I'm pretty sure most of the farriers there, if you told them what you wanted, they would purposely go and not do it just to prove a point. Something that I trained in about 6 months ago and hasn't been mentioned at all today, but that's something that I think is a 3,000-year-old art that actually more of us should practice, and I actually don't think it's a very difficult skill to learn, is acupuncture. I'm not saying that it's going to help with our tendons, but if you've got a horse that's been off for 6 months with a tendon that you've chucked away, it's lost all of that lovely top line it had. Particularly when we think of our thoroughbreds, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Kissing spine, sore backs. And we're trying to bring these horses back into work that are then, quite reactive. They're quite difficult to bring back into work. People describe them as being fresh, always sharp. Actually some of that could be due to a level of back pain that they've managed before because they've been fit and well muscled, and suddenly we've let all that muscle drop away, and we need to find a way of getting them to cope with it. Most people aren't going to have a 6-month tendon, time off for a tendon and then suddenly decide, actually, I'm going to do kissing spine surgery on it as well. So we need to help these horses, and they coped before. So if they coped before, why can't they cope now with it? Acupuncture is a great way of pain relief, really. And it can also be, I found it very, very beneficial for sacroiliac pain and neck pain. Again, the number of horses that we see that come through that may have a leg injury but actually have a level of neck pain because they've been holding themselves up and away from wherever they are, and they're so unbelievably tight and stiff through here. How many do you then suddenly go, right, move your neck, and they just can't, or they want to, but it's so stuck. Acupuncture is actually superb for releasing that off. So hopefully in that 15-20 minutes I've not bored you all in that whirlwind, and just thank you very much for listening. Here is just a quick picture of me, because on Friday I take my fitness test, and a week on Saturday I'm actually riding around the racecourse at York having a go at being a jockey. It's not what I normally do, and it's certainly been quite an interesting 6 months. I've been riding out with Tony Coyle in Moulton, who's illuminating in his opinions of most things. But yeah, it's been good. Thank you very much for listening.